All right, I'm going to put some pictures tonight. All right, not a happy picture, but this is a movement called Free Palestine. I don't know if you guys are aware of what's going on in the Western world of America and Western Europe, but there's a movement where many young Americans, university students, have been shouting this slogan for the past 18 months since the war started on October 7th. This is their slogan printed on this banner here. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Has anybody ever heard that before? Okay. This is their slogan. Yet when you ask them, most of them have no idea what river, what sea, or what the sentence even means. It's just a catchy phrase. That's how you get people involved. Get them a catchy phrase to follow. But they found a cause. This is a cause that people have dedicated themselves to. What is a cause? A cause is something that gives somebody purpose, a movement that they dedicate themselves. People are looking to support a cause that they can support. Let me just give you, I want to be clear what the word cause means, because I'm going to be using it quite a bit tonight. Two definitions from the dictionary that really help to clarify what I mean when I say cause. Because in English we say we support a cause. A cause is like maybe supporting children in need. Okay, that's a cause. We give money, we go to, the cause, in Tel Aviv, they're doing the Afghanot, they do the demonstrations. That's a cause. They're coming there. It's for the cause of trying to bring an end to the war, bring all the hostages home. That's a cause. But the dictionary definition of a cause is a reason or motive that urges us to act. Okay, it causes us to do something. It's also a movement that we defend or we advocate for because we're deeply committed to seeing something happen. Okay, so this is the cause that young Americans are involved with. Free Palestine is their cause. I don't like the cause, but it is their cause. They're deeply committed to it. What I'm going to say tonight is we as Christians, we as believers in Yeshua, we should also have a cause that we're committed to. And that cause is not focused on any type of human rights as much as people are drawn to that. Our cause is to be focused on who Yeshua is, to be focused on the Lord Jesus Christ. We should be deeply committed specifically to live for His honor, for His glory, and to defend that glory when it's attacked by others. King David stood for such a cause. So let's start in 1 Samuel chapter 17. We want to look at the story of David versus Goliath just as a way of introduction. But in 1 Samuel 17, we see that Goliath stood there and he defied the armies of the living God. He was saying that the armies of God are nothing compared to his strength and size. And David was not going to stand by and do nothing. He was going to defend the glory of God, the honor of God's name. And so he had some very strong words for the Philistine in verse 26. In 1 Samuel 17, verse 26, David spake to the men that stood by him, saying, "What shall be done to the man that kills this Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?" Strong words. And when his eldest brother Eliab heard him, he thought David was just being proud or being mischievous. Older brothers always like to rebuke their younger brothers. But what was David's response to this? In verse 29, David said, "What have I done? What have I now done? Is there not a cause?" So in English, it's translated as cause. There's kind of debate over how to translate it from the Hebrew because we just have the word davar, hello davar. But I think the English here captures it well to say, is there not a cause? David's basically saying, should I not have said what I said? Is there not a reason to say what I said? Shouldn't we be defending God's glory when it's attacked? Is there not a cause? David was committed to the cause of defending the name of God, the glory of God, especially when it was being attacked by heathens. And so as we look at our passage tonight, it might be good for us to ask ourselves the same question that David asks here. Is there not a cause? Is there not something that urges us to take action, to stand for something? Is there not something that we should defend and advocate for? Because in this world, everyone's looking for a cause to support. Just like these young Americans and others in this Free Palestine movement, they're looking for something to support. And when they don't believe in Yeshua, they'll find any type of cause to support. People are looking for something to support, and that was true even 2,000 years ago in Ephesus. We're going back to Ephesus today. And Rachel, can you put like a chair right here? There's like sun going right in my eye. Maybe just like one of those blue chairs, thanks. So let's go to Acts 19. We're in Ephesus, so we started in Ephesus last week. And so we're going to continue. Paul and his disciples were in Ephesus. And they found magicians there practicing black magic. We said last week, by going into Ephesus, Paul was going into Satan's territory. A lot of evil going on in Ephesus. But the magicians, they saw what happened. The 7 sons of Sceva, they came. And they tried to cast out a demon, but the demon attacked them, overthrew them, and they saw what was going on. And Paul was there preaching the gospel in Ephesus. And so many of the magicians saw and heard the gospel. They turned to Yeshua. And they burned their books. All their books of spells and black magic. And so they faced that battle in Ephesus. But now we're going to see they faced another battle in Ephesus against evil. But now instead of fighting magicians and demons and things like this, they're battling against the worship of a false god, the goddess Diana. For many Ephesians, they had a cause. They were committed to a cause, and that cause was the worship of a goddess named Diana. In Ephesus, we see really a battle between two causes. We see a battle between the cause that the Ephesians are dedicated to, the cause of worshiping Diana, this goddess. And that's conflicting with this other cause that Paul is promoting, the cause of Christ, the cause of believing in Yeshua. So we're going to look at that today. Two sides standing for two different causes. And as we do that, as we examine what's going on, let's keep David's question in our minds. Is there not a cause? And are we deeply committed to the right cause? Again, we're in Ephesus, and we saw that Paul did have great success there. For 3 years, he had success. But again, it came with battles. We saw the battle last week with the magicians, the black magic. But they got saved, and it says in verse 19 of Acts 19, verse 19, that they came and they burned their books. But now with the black magic dealt with, the other evil was actually a bigger evil, and it was big business. The conflict we see in Ephesus is actually similar to what we saw in Philippi. Remember in Philippi there was a girl, and she would prophesy and say things, and she was making money for her masters. And so Paul comes, casts the demon out of this girl, and they lost money, and they were very upset about it because this girl was no longer making them money. In Ephesus, Paul comes along, and he now does the same thing in a way and disturbs another business. Only in Ephesus, it was a much bigger business. It wasn't just two guys profiting off of one girl. It was almost the entire city profiting off of Diana. But when you disturb a bigger business, you should expect a bigger conflict. Like I said last week, Ephesus was one of the largest cities in the world. 250,000 people in Ephesus. And the size and the wealth of that city mostly had to do with what was happening in the temple of Diana. So let's bring up a picture. This was the temple of Diana in Ephesus. Large temple dedicated to worshiping this false goddess named Diana. Diana, you may have heard the word Artemis. So Artemis is actually the Greek name, but Diana is kind of the Romanized Latin version. So we're going to use the name Diana, although you might hear Artemis as well. But people all over the world came to this temple to worship Diana. The temple of Diana, this was pretty much the pride of Ephesus. This was the heart of Ephesus, of the Ephesians. And tradition says about this woman, she was born near Ephesus, and she was viewed as the mother of all life. And so they had a big statue of her, kind of a weird statue. She was just a woman with just rows and rows of breasts, kind of a really strange, weird statue. But the idea is she is the mother of all life, the mother of all nature. In verse 35 of Acts 19, it says that her image fell down from Jupiter. 35. It says the man was saying her image fell down from Jupiter. Most likely what happened in Ephesus is a meteorite had fallen down to Ephesus, had some sort of crude image of what they thought looked like a woman, and so they then sculpted and made a statue for her. But that was, for them, a sign that this was the God coming from heaven. But you see, the temple was a magnificent temple, very beautiful. At one point, it was actually considered one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. It was 130 meters long by 70 meters wide, with 127 columns, each 18 meters high. This is a big place. But this temple wasn't just for religious purposes. It was also a place of great finances and wealth. It was a money-making business. The temple itself owned much of the land around it. The temple was about a mile and a half outside of Ephesus, of the city. But it owned a lot of land and it controlled the fisheries of the area. And so a lot of money was coming in. And so the priests weren't just there to help the people worship. They were like bankers. People stored a lot of money in this temple. And so this temple functioned like a bank. It would make loans and take deposits. So when we talk about this temple of Diana, it's not just a religion, it was a business. And when Paul came to Ephesus and preached there for 3 years, Paul was bad for their business. Let's read verse 23 of Acts 19. And the same time there arose no small stir about that way. Here we see a reference to Christianity as be calling that way, the way. It's how many of the early people called Christianity. But he was making waves. It says no small stir was there. A lot of people in Ephesus were now hearing about Yeshua. Paul was making a difference in Ephesus. He probably wasn't the first person to bring the gospel to Ephesus, but he was definitely the first one to really make a difference and impact the way people were worshiping Diana. So he had 3 years of success in Ephesus, 3 years of success in Satan's territory. At this point, I believe Satan had just about enough of it, and so it was time for a real big attack on Paul. It wasn't just against Paul, it was against all those who followed that way, the way of Christianity. It's a good side lesson for us as we look at this passage to realize whenever we're starting to see success in ministry, we should expect a spiritual attack from the enemy. It can come in many forms, including physical danger. It can come in health attacks as well. But for Paul and the Ephesian believers, their attack was going to come in the form of a very large and angry mob. Rioters. This angry mob was formed by a man named Demetrius. Let's read verses 24 to 27. Yes. For a certain man named Demetrius, a silversmith, which made silver shrines for Diana, brought no small gain unto the craftsmen, whom he called together with the workmen of like occupation, and said, Sirs, you know that by this craft we have our wealth. Moreover, you see and hear that not alone at Ephesus, but almost throughout all Asia, this Paul has persuaded and turned away much people, saying that they be no gods which are made with hands. So that not only this our craft is in danger to be set at naught, but also that the temple of the great goddess Diana should be despised, and her magnificence should be destroyed, whom all Asia and the world worships. Here we have Demetrius is introduced in verse 24 as a silversmith who made silver shrines for Diana. This was his business. What happened? Visitors came to the temple, and when they went home, they wanted to bring a little piece of Diana back with them. They wanted the people in their home or their city to also worship Diana. So people like Demetrius, they made little statues of Diana out of silver. And he wasn't a generous man. He wasn't just giving these out as gifts to come worship Diana. He was making money off of these shrines, these little statues of Diana made out of silver. This was his business. He was a silversmith. And so as Paul came to town and started preaching about that way, more and more people followed Yeshua, and less people came to the shrine, which means what? Less and less people came and bought shrines from Demetrius and other men like that. Obviously, this made him upset as a businessman. It's not that he was very passionate about worshiping Diana and that others would worship her. He was mad because it hurt his pocket. He was losing money. And so it says in verse 24, we see he was making lots of money off of this. It says it brought no small gain to him and his fellow craftsmen from these shrines, these statues. Verse 25 says, by this craft we have our wealth. We have all our money because of this business of selling these statues to people. So they saw Paul and his preaching as a threat, not so much to their religion, but to their money, to their business. So the conflict in Ephesus wasn't just with false religion, it was with greed and the love of money. We know 1 Timothy 6:10, the love of money is the root of all evil. It's not money itself, but that passionate pursuit of money, that love of it. Demetrius, I would say, was one of those men that just loved money. I'm sure he was still making enough, even though a few people were leaving the temple, but he didn't want to lose any of that. So when Paul came and drew people away from that temple, he was very upset. But Demetrius wasn't just a businessman, he was a good marketer. He was good at advertising. He understood that with good advertising, he can bring business back. Okay, he wasn't have Google ads back then or anything like that. How did he advertise his business? What was his marketing campaign? What did he do to bring people back? He needed a cause. He needed to show the people there was a cause worth supporting. He knew he couldn't just tell people, I'm losing money, I want you to come back so I can get my money back. That wasn't a good sell. That wasn't a good advertising campaign. Just say he was greedy and wanted more money. What he needed to do was create a cause that people would get behind so that naturally they would come back to the temple and start buying shrines again. Get the business back up. And so how did he do that? He did it by trying to stir up a commotion to get people devoted to Diana again. A pep rally. His plan was basically to portray Paul as someone who is going against what Ephesus stood for. Going against the very honor and dignity of the pride of Ephesus, of Diana and this temple. Paul was a threat to our city. Oh, thanks, Pastor. And so Demetrius had created this cause that people could support and get behind. He was instilling this sense of patriotism, really. Religious devotion to what the Ephesians were known for. Listen again to Demetrius' words in verses 26 and 27. He's saying that almost throughout all Asia, this Paul is persuading and turning away people, much people, saying that they be no gods which are made with hands, so that not only our craft is in danger to be set at naught, but also at the temple of the great goddess Diana. He's lifting up Diana, this great goddess Diana. Because of Paul, she should be despised. And her magnificence, her greatness that we all know about as Ephesians, should be destroyed. Whom all Asia and the world worships. Everybody's coming to us to worship Diana, and Paul is a threat to that. Let's stand up as Ephesians and fight against this. Let's become more devoted to Diana. This is Demetrius, this is his advertising campaign. He's not so much worried about this temple and people worshiping Diana. Again, what he's worried about is his pocket, the money. He wants people to come back so that they would buy shrines again. And to do that, he had to paint Paul as the bad guy. That Paul was bad for Ephesus. He was a threat to what made Ephesus a great city. He was a threat to the magnificence of our temple and Diana. He created this almost nationalistic pride. And how many mobs have formed throughout history by appealing to people to instill that patriotism or that nationalism, to get people together. To view, when you tell people there's a threat to our nation, and people get behind that. They can get angry sometimes, and they'll typically do something to defend what's being attacked. That is the mindset of Demetrius here with the Ephesians. He appealed to what the Ephesians took pride in, and that was this, the temple of Diana. But again, his true cause, this was the cause he was promoting. Let's protect what makes Ephesus great. But what's his true cause? I want to make more money. He created a fake cause for the people so that he could fulfill his true cause of putting money back in his pocket. And often it's the same thing today. Many things are presented in this world as a good cause to support and follow, but there's always somebody in the background making money off of it, profiting off of it. So Demetrius started forming this mob and it all starts with a chant. What's the chant? Verse 28. And when they heard these things, they were full of wrath and cried out, saying, "Great is Diana of the Ephesians." This was an angry mob. They were full of wrath, it says. And they shouted out their catchy phrase. Their catchphrase is, "Great is Diana of the Ephesians." They shout out. See that today. When people can't defend their position today intelligently, what do? They just shout. They shout a catchy phrase. They shout, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free." Free Palestine, free Palestine. They have nothing intelligent to defend it with. They just want to shout. That's what's going on in Ephesus. And you can't be a mob without your catchphrase. Maybe it was more catchy back then, but just "Great is Diana of the Ephesians." Doesn't rhyme, but I guess it was enough for them to catch on. And so what's happening in the city? So I'll show another picture. Here's the layout of Ephesus in Paul's day. And so what was happening is so here's the temple over here. So you can see it's outside of the city limits. This is the main agora, the marketplace. So every city we go to with Paul... Oh, okay, you want to use the laser pointer? This is the agora. We keep talking about the agora. This is the main meeting center of people. This is where ideas are exchanged. This is where goods are sold. So most likely Demetrius is going through the crowded area of the city, shouting out, "Great is Diana of the Ephesians." They got their chant going. The people are joining. The crowd is growing. The mob is growing. And they make their way here to the theater, the Roman theater. Okay? For those of you who went to Caesarea 2 weeks ago, very similar. It's always the same structure. It's the Roman structure of the theater. So now they're filling in the seats. This is a big event. The mob is filling in. And just imagine it. This specific theater could fit up to 24,000 people. So we don't know how many were in there, but again, population size of the city was 250,000. I'm sure they could have easily filled this entire theater, shouting in anger, "Great is Diana of the Ephesians. Great is Diana of the Ephesians." And again, what is the focus of their anger? What are they saying is attacking their greatness, the greatness of Diana? Christians. Paul, the way that he's preaching. So they couldn't find Paul on the way to the theater, but who did they find? Verse 29, they catch two Christians. It says, "And the whole city was filled with confusion." Verse 29. "And having caught Gaius and Aristarchus, men of Macedonia, Paul's companions in travel, they rushed with one accord into the theater." So you see this, the image is just anger and just fury and quickly moving towards this theater. And along the way, they see these two Christians, Gaius and Aristarchus. They come into this theater shouting, angry. Complete chaos in that theater, a lot of confusion. It says the whole city was filled with confusion in verse 29. And we see that confusion continue even after they all settle into their seats in the theater. Let's read verses 32 to 34. Skip over to 32 and 34. "Some therefore cried one thing and some another." This is all happening in the theater. "For the assembly was confused, and the more part knew not wherefore they were come together. And they drew Alexander out of the multitude, the Jews, putting him forward. And Alexander beckoned with the hand and would have made his defense unto the people. But when they knew that he was a Jew, all with one voice about the space of 2 hours," 2 hours this is going on, "they cried out, 'Great is Diana of the Ephesians.'" This is the catchphrase of their cause. Just a mob of angry and confused people, shouting out different things. Half of them didn't even know why they were there. That's what these verses are telling us. They're shouting things and they don't even know why they're there. They're just joining the crowd. Sometimes it just feels good to shout, I guess. Doesn't matter what you're shouting, just shout it. In the midst of their confusion, they don't even have a Christian out there speaking. They pull out this Jewish man who doesn't believe in Yeshua, Alexander. And so they're confused about even who they're supposed to be persecuting here. 2 hours, confusion, and shouting out, "Great is Diana of the Ephesians." That is how the mob can be described in one phrase. In verse 32, the assembly was confused. The assembly was confused. This describes this group of people, confused people. An assembly of confused people. This is an interesting word. Assembly here is the word ekklesia. This is the Greek word we use for the church. That's usually what we think of when we hear the Greek word ekklesia is the church. A church, ekklesia means to be called out. People who are called out. Christians are the ekklesia because they're called out of the world and put into the body of Christ. This mob was an ekklesia, was an assembly, but a different type of called out. They were called out, but not by God, into a special body of Christ. They were called out by their own inner anger and lust and confusion. And that really describes the lost world in which we live. Lost people are in this assembly of confusion. They're in this theater shouting out, not knowing really even why they're there or what they're shouting out, what their true cause is, what their true purpose is in life. Without Yeshua, people are confused and angry. In Ephesus, those lost heathens were confused and angry. but they did pose a real threat to Paul and to the gospel message spreading throughout Asia. So as we see this hectic event and we see that Paul was in danger, that other Christians were in danger, that the possibility to spread the gospel throughout Asia Minor was in danger, God reveals himself and his sovereignty in the midst of that confusion. God is still in control even when the world is confused and chaotic and shouting out. How does God put an end to this? Because how do you calm a theater full of 25,000 angry, screaming Ephesians dedicated to a cause? How do you dissipate that without giving them what they want? God shows his sovereignty in this situation. What happens here? He uses people to calm the situation apart from Paul. Usually we see it's Paul that is being the one to put an end to these problems. But God uses several people here. And to really appreciate what God did in Ephesus, we need to realize how serious this mob was and how life-threatening this mob was to Paul and to other Christians. There are really three passages that Paul wrote in his epistles that seem to indicate to us how he felt about this mob and the real danger he thought that his life was in. I just want to look at two of those quickly. Both in Corinthians. One is in 1 Corinthians. 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 32. Keep your finger in Acts. We're going to go back there just real quick over to 1 Corinthians 15. 1 Corinthians 15, verse 32. He says, "If after the manner of men I have fought with beasts at Ephesus, what advantage it me if the dead rise not? Let us eat and drink, for tomorrow we die." But that first part of the verse, he says, "I have fought with beasts at Ephesus." This is a reference to gladiators in the Roman Colosseum where they would make people fight wild animals. Okay, I think Brad talked a little bit about that in Caesarea. But we see that Paul was a Roman citizen. Obviously, he never fought actual animals in a Roman hippodrome or Colosseum. So what is he referring to here? Most likely he's talking about the ferocity, how angry that mob was. They were as if he was in there fighting beasts, wild animals. I believe that's what this reference is to. Paul understood the real danger in Ephesus. 2 Corinthians, let's look at one more and just flip a couple pages. 2 Corinthians chapter 1. Again, it's not 100% clear that these verses speak of his time in Ephesus and the mob, but it's very possible that yes, it does. 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 8 to 10. He says, "For we would not, brethren, have you ignorant of our trouble which came to us in Asia." So something happened to them in Asia, Asia Minor, "that we were pressed out of measure, above strength, insomuch that we despaired even of life. But we had the sentence of death in ourselves, that we should not trust in ourselves, but in God, which raises the dead, who delivered us from so great a death, and does deliver, in whom we trust that he will yet deliver us." So Paul talks about a very, seems like life-threatening event in Asia. It's very possible it was during this mob riot in Ephesus. If that's true, it means he thought that was the end. He thought he was going to die there. He thought it was almost out of his control. But how does he end these verses? It caused him to turn to God, to trust in God. A good lesson for us. In the most dire and worst of situations, we can trust God knowing he's still in control. And he indeed was in control in Ephesus, even with this large mob. Seems to indicate to us just how Paul felt about the situation there. Let's go back to Acts 19. So this was a very dangerous mob that threatened Paul's life and the life of all the believers in Ephesus. And yet, knowing that danger, if these words really show how Paul felt about the danger there, he was still willing to run into that theater. 25,000 people hating you. How many of you would run into a theater like that? Basically shouting out for your death. He wanted to go in there. However, God prevented him from entering that theater. And God used both Christians and non-Christians to prevent Paul from going in. God protected Paul in his sovereignty. Verses 30 and 31. We're back in Acts 19, verses 30 and 31. And when Paul would have entered onto the people, the disciples suffered him not. So first, God uses the disciples to keep him from going in, believers. But also verse 31, and certain of the chief of Asia, so prominent men in that area, which were his friends. God had brought him there. They were his friends. They sent unto him, desiring him that he would not adventure himself into the theater. What an adventure that would have been to go in there. But God uses all these people. Paul's there, knows it's dangerous. He still wants to go in. He wants to do something about the situation. But God sends these people to hold Paul back and say, no, it's not for you to go in here. Let me take care of it. Paul may have thought he had the power. He saw success in other cities. Maybe he thought he'd be able to calm this crowd down, persuade them. But God always knows best. And so it was God's desire for Paul not to go in there at this time. God saved Paul by keeping him out of there. He then allowed Paul to live, to go and spread the gospel further throughout Asia Minor, throughout all the world. And God himself is really the one that put an end to the mob through using another person, a local government official. Let's just read to get the context of the rest of the story. Let's just read verses 35 to 41. So we're in Acts 19, finishing the story, verses 35 to 41. And when the town clerk had appeased the people, so this is a town clerk, just some local official, government official, he said, "You men of Ephesus, what man is there that knows not how that the city of the Ephesians is a worshiper of the great goddess Diana?" So he starts by just showing them, relating to them, yes, this is the pride of our town, Diana. And of the image which fell down from Jupiter. So here's the reference to the meteor falling down. "Seeing then that these things cannot be spoken against, you ought to be quiet and to do nothing rashly. For you have brought hither these men, which are neither robbers of churches, nor yet blasphemers of your goddess. Wherefore, if Demetrius and the craftsmen which are with him have a matter against any man, the law is open. Go to court if you want to. And there are deputies, let them implead one another. But if you inquire anything concerning other matters, it shall be determined in a lawful assembly." They were a confused, chaotic assembly. He says, no, you must make it, do something lawfully, be a lawful assembly. "For we are in danger to be called in question for this day's uproar, there being no cause whereby we may give an account of this concourse." And when he had thus spoken, he dismissed the assembly. That's the end of the mob. 24,000 people file out of there. The simple town clerk, God used him to just reason with the mob to get them to disperse. Paul didn't need to run in there. Just seeing Paul probably would have just angered them more to shout louder. But God knew better. He used this town clerk to reason with them, say, nothing's going to harm our temple. Nothing's going to harm Diana. She is great. We all know she's great. Paul's not going to harm that. Calm down. If you do have a problem with Demetrius, if you have a problem with your business, you go to court, you solve this civilly. He also was afraid of a riot of the Romans hearing what was happening in Ephesus and punishing them. That's what he indicates in verse 40. We're in danger here to be called in question for this uproar today. So as it looked like this mob was going to do severe damage to Paul, to even kill him, and the other believers there were comforted once again to see the sovereignty of God. God's in control. And by preserving Paul's life and all the believers there, the church in Ephesus only grew, only became bigger. The gospel spread further. At the same time as the church was growing, there, the worship of Diana started fading away. In that day, many Ephesians were dedicated to the cause of Diana, the cause of the great temple of Diana. And yet, that cause came to an end, as many causes that people support come to an end. Let me show you the temple of Diana today. That's the temple of Diana today. This is where thousands of Ephesians were committed to a cause 2,000 years ago. The Ephesians had chanted, "Great is Diana of the Ephesians." The whole world worshipped Diana, it says in that one verse, in verse 27. And today, what remains of their cause that they supported so fervently? All that remains in Western Turkey today is this swampy tourist site with a few pillars remaining. Ephesus is gone. Temple of Diana is gone. The only people going there now are archaeologists and people on Holy Land tours. Their cause, like many causes, no matter how fervent they are at any point in time, they disappear if it's not based on the truth. But you know which cause hasn't gone away? The cause of Christ. The way that it was described in Acts 19. The way continues. Christianity continues. 2,000 years ago, there was this great conflict of two causes in Ephesus, the cause of Diana versus the cause of Christ. There's no conflict today, because only one cause continues. See, eventually all other causes fade away. Free Palestine is a cause that comes and goes depending on what's happening in the news, as many causes before that have come and gone. They don't last because they're based on propaganda and lies. Eventually people lose interest. They realize it's not worth their time and devotion. The causes of this world don't last forever. There's only one cause that has lasted continuously since the beginning. And that's the cause of really promoting the glory of God. And for the past 2,000 years, it's been the promotion of the name of Yeshua. Paul knew that. And he writes some very fitting words in Ephesians, to the Ephesians, in Ephesians chapter 1. We're going to close with that. And I wonder if Paul had in mind the riot, the mob in Ephesus when he wrote to the Ephesian believers in Ephesians chapter 1. Turn to Ephesians chapter 1. Just read verses 19 to 21 to show that no matter what causes come and rise up, no matter what people are shouting, no matter who they're calling great, whether it's Diana or whatever it is today, what outlasts all of it? What cause endures forever? Ephesians chapter 1, verses 19 to 21. And what is the exceeding greatness? There's our word. Remember, they're calling Diana great and magnificent. But what is the exceeding greatness of his power to usward who believe, according to the working of his mighty power, which he wrought in Christ when he raised him from the dead and set him at his own right hand in the heavenly places, far above all principality, power, and might, and dominion, and every name that is named, not only in this world, but also in that which is to come. In Ephesus, they say, Diana's great. There's no greater name than Diana. But Paul makes it clear, not just in Ephesus, but throughout the entire world, there's no name above his name. The greatest name. So if we considered the question from earlier, David asks, is there not a cause? And to which cause are we deeply committed? We have a Christian cause, and without a Christian cause, people will be manipulated to follow some other cause. Because again, the world is confused. It is an assembly of confusion in this world. They're looking for a cause to be a part of, something to support, something to give them purpose in their life. But if they don't hear about Yeshua, if we don't go and tell them about Yeshua, they'll find something else to fill that void. They'll find a cause, but it won't be the cause of Christ. They'll join Free Palestine or whatever cause is out there offered to them. So let's be committed to the true cause, the cause of Christ, the cause of promoting the gospel of Yeshua. Live for him. Encourage others to be committed to the same cause. Is there not a cause? Yes, we could answer David. There is a cause. And that cause is Yeshua, promoting him. The question is, are we committed to that cause?